Okay, so here's an agenda for today. We'll run through in the next 10 minutes a quick introduction of who we are, our application process itself, the types of founders and startups we look for, top mistakes that lead to rejection, and then resources for a standout application. And just for today, Hsu Ken will share with you his feedback as well for people who have submitted their decks before. So you get firsthand feedback from Hsu Ken on how to sharpen your application, how to sharpen your pitch. So yeah, a little bit about who we are. For anyone who's new to us, we are a YC-style program focused on Southeast Asia. As a VC, there are 3 points about us that's important to remember. We invest up to $500,000, and if you're accepted today, we send you the money today. We don't wait until the program starts. Number 2 is that the full amount is yours. We don't do program fees or clawbacks. It's your money to decide how and what you want to do with. And that brings me to my third point. We think the investment that you actually get is the least valuable thing we offer to founders. So during the 3 months program, you'll receive weekly growth and fundraising support from Hsu Ken, from Brian, and visiting partners, all of whom have been founders themselves. And at the end of 3 months, you'll participate in a demo day pitching to a network of over 400 investors. Since we've been founded in 2020, we've invested in 150 plus companies and 300 plus founders. These companies have gone on to raise 168 million and are collectively worth over 1.2 billion. So S25 batch, our deadline is Friday, 27th June. We'll have a link for you to actually join. If you join this link, via this link, we'll make sure you get a fast track of your review. So visiting partners, a large part of our program's value comes from the mentorship from our visiting partners. So Iterative only works with visiting partners who have been founders themselves, because the only advice that works is the advice that comes from someone who's been in your shoes before. The program is designed to help founders achieve 5 to 7% growth weekly. So visiting partners not only lend their expertise, but they help founders stay focused, accountable, and efficient to clear their biggest growth blockers so founders can solve their most pressing problems. So visiting partners change every batch, but some we've had in the past include Aaron. He's the co-founder of ISA, a Thailand-based startup that automates immigration. And he's a serial entrepreneur, and his first startup was acquired by House. Diana is the founder and CEO of GPay, a startup that gave financial independence to domestic workers in Singapore. She's currently the Senior Strategy and Operations Manager at Revolut, where she's launched the digital bank Revolut in her homeland, Ukraine. And last but not least is Derry. He's the co-founder of Ula, which brings e-commerce to small retailers across Southeast Asia. And they have raised 141 million from Sequoia, Lightspeed, Tiger, and more. So our application process, very straightforward. We want to summarize it as 1 application, 2 calls, and 1 yes. So you submit your application online via our website. We have a link in the chat for your use. Every single application is reviewed by a human being, and usually more than 1. So if your application passes this first review, you move on to the next stage, which is a 30-minute call with one of our venture partners. This is someone on the team or someone who is a founder from our community who has successfully gone through the program already. In this first call, we want to learn more about your startup, get to know you as a founder, and if you pass this first call, you advance to the final call, which is a 30-minute conversation with Brian or Hsu Ken. So most founders are surprised that our team show up to both calls prepared. We would have already read your application thoroughly beforehand for either call, so you don't actually have to pitch to us on the call. You don't have to go through your deck with us on the call too. It's actually very conversational. What's important to note for the final call is that Brian and Hsu Ken will ask you questions to learn more about the problem you're solving, your business, and to know more about you yourself as a founder and how you think. Iterative is not consensus driven, which means only Brian or Hsu Ken needs to decide if they want to invest. This process typically takes about 2 weeks. So the last thing to add about this process is that we're not looking for a reason to say no to anyone. We're looking for a reason to invest. That's our mindset when we go into the application process review. Oh yes, and Kathy too as well. She's our head of investments. So founders that we look for. The way we assess whether we can believe in the founder and whether they are capable is by evaluating 3 different factors as you see here on the screen. We can break it down one by one. So the first is, do founders do what they say they're going to do consistently? Consistent execution is easy to say and really hard to do. Our program is designed around 1-week sprints, which means that every week You'll meet with Hsu Ken, Brian, or our visiting partners in one-on-one office hours to discuss what your startup's biggest problems are and what the biggest blockers are. They decide on a plan, and it's the founder's job to execute and get the job done. The next week, you meet again during one-on-one office hours. So from our experience, the best founders are the ones who said, last week, I told you I was going to do X, Y, and Z to get 5% more users, and I did X, Y, and Z. If they reach their targets, the conversation is about figuring out why it worked and how to do more of that. If they didn't reach their target, then it's a conversation about why it didn't work. In both scenarios, the main catalyst for progress is that the founder did what they said they were going to do, regardless of the outcome. The important takeaway from this process is consistent execution is something that we think about very carefully. It shows you that you've thought about what you're going to do and have a good plan for how you're going to do it. And founders who are structured thinkers and good problem solvers are typically better at this. The second one is, are founders convincing? This one is simple and important because founders typically have to convince a lot of different people to do a lot of different things all the time. They need to convince people to work with them, to buy their product, to convince people like Hsu Ken or Brian to give them money, and every other founder from Series A onwards. So being convincing is critical to being a founder. So lastly, we found that founders who are internally motivated, that is motivated by solving the problem they set out to solve, learning as much as they can about their industry or how to build their startups, tend to do better and be more resilient than founders who are externally motivated by things like making money or becoming famous. So if you want to, make millions or become famous, and if that's your goal, there are other easier ways to do that than starting a startup. So what kind of startups do we look for to fund? Our vision is to increase the GDP of Southeast Asia through entrepreneurship, which is why we have a rule that at least one founder is based in Southeast Asia, or a majority of the company's customers has to be based in Southeast Asia. Our founders also need to be working full-time on their startup. So to borrow a phrase from Hsu Ken, the reason why is that founders need to believe in their idea enough to quit their jobs, not believe in it only if we do. So Iterative is industry agnostic, and we're open to funding companies across all sectors, from B2B marketplaces to AI to fintech to biotech. We get asked a lot also about the stages we fund, and Iterative is open to both early and later stage companies. And when we say early, we've invested in companies that have just been a concept, just a simple idea. For later stage companies, even if you're generating $1 million in revenue and have been operational for a while with a team of 20 or so, many founders still find our program value adds their day-to-day in identifying new growth, in hiring matters, or being able to create roles and responsibilities in their growing organization. So for companies in both stages, we look for the same two things. Is the startup solving an important problem? And do the founders have the ability to solve that problem? So I talked about founders in the previous slide. Now let me address what an important problem is. So is the startup solving an important problem? A startup exists to solve one. How big that problem is will dictate the market size and then the product. For a startup to be successful and venture backable, it must tackle an important problem. So how do you tell if a problem is important? We answer that by answering two questions. How many people have this problem, and how painful is the problem for each person? So with these two questions here, there's two kinds of emotions we can access it with. Is the problem experience very painful, or is it kind of annoying? So if many people are experiencing a very painful problem, we see this as a large market. If a few people experience a problem that's not that painful, it's just annoying, we kind of see this as a small market. So these are very stark differences and more obvious. The next two scenarios are a little bit more nuanced. If a few people have a very painful problem, we see this as a medium to a large market, as these people are likely to seek out and pay for a solution to their painful problem. If many people have a problem that's only a little bit annoying, they're less likely to care about solving this problem as it's a minor annoyance. So the greater the people, the greater the pain, the bigger the market. So if any one of you have in your decks right now a TAM, honestly, we don't look at TAMs. Focus on how big the problem is and how important the problem you're solving is. I think that's the one thing that a lot of people and a lot of founders ask, like, do we need to include TAM? This is the answer. So traction. As I mentioned, sometimes we invest in very early stage startups where they may not be a product yet. So we ask for traction. And the way we think about traction is evidence of growth, regardless of which stage you are in. We want to see that the founder has identified a significant pain point and gathered evidence that their solution is directly addressing this pain point. So if you have a product, evidence is product traction. If you don't have a product, traction might look like the number of online bookings, which is what our portfolio company Beauty Buddy did. So they are a social-powered marketplace for wellness services such as salons. They created a free Calendly to start accepting online booking requests and fed these bookings to salons as usual. And this helped prove that there was a growing demand for the service and that online bookings would generate more revenue. Now, the rate of growth is more important to us than the actual number. For example, if you get 5 people your first week to use your product, and that number triples every week, these 3x weekly growth for an important problem is much more attractive to us than if you were getting, say, thousands of users from running one ad, but then your growth plateaus and then you struggle to get new users again after that week. The last thing we'll talk about in what we look for in the application question is where we ask for insights. In the application process, we're trying to learn as much as we can from you. Another way to define the insight we look for is rare knowledge. Do you know something about your industry that very few other people know? We are looking for founders who are informed about what they are working on, and some of the best founders have spent significant time learning about their industry and their users. So internally, we have a lingo to describe this, which is insights per minute. How many new insights can Hsu Ken or Brian walk away with after one phone call with you? If it's high, that's a good sign. You are the founder of your own startup, so our team gets into these calls with you assuming you are the expert of your startup, the expert of your problem, and your industry. If they are not walking away learning anything new, that's not a good sign. So the last thing is contrarian belief. Brian and Hsu Ken have been in the space for a long time, so they've been co-founders for almost 20 years now. They believe that the next big thing is probably something that nobody has done before, or it's a different solution to a problem people have tried to tackle before. That's what we mean by contrarian belief. Being contrarian can be a good thing, especially if you have some evidence to back you up. Okay, some of the mistakes to avoid. This may or may not be obvious, but an application that's full of industry jargon or technical terms makes it difficult for us to understand what you're trying to do, especially if it's an industry specific. Use simple terms to describe the problem, solution, or your business. This will help those who are reviewing your application learn more about your business as quickly as they can. Remember, these calls are short. You want to be able to get as much information as possible and not have to Google these jargon terms. The next common mistake we see is the problem statements, which describe the solution, but not the problem. If your problem statement is something like, we are working to develop an AI-powered chatbot to handle customer service to improve response time, that's not really a problem statement. A problem statement will focus on the pain point first, backed by data. So customer service teams are overwhelmed. The average response time has increased X% over the last 72 hours because of this. Customer service scores have dropped from 10% to 6%. So that's a good example of what to say when you want to talk about a pain point and a problem. Another common problem we see is when founders aren't able to recall key metrics off the top of their head. As the expert of your business and your startup, you should be able to share the metrics important to your business off the top of your head. Your weekly active users, your weekly growth percentage, whatever it is relevant to your business. Another common problem is founders trying to solve every problem, everywhere, all at once. We see this a lot. Founders are juggling a lot of different aspects of the business. We understand that. But the best founders we see are the ones who are able to focus and zero in on one particular area that, when solved, is immediately beneficial and solving for that one problem before moving on to the next. So the last few slides I'll talk about, the top 3 rejection reasons. We reject companies if technology does not appear to be a key differentiator, or if your company operates out of our geographical scope. But typically, these are our top 3. These are real data points from our S25 batch, where 12% or over 100 companies had insufficient validation. So the founder may have talked to some people, did some surveys, but hasn't dug deep enough to validate the problem and validate that people want the solution that they're proposing. The second top reason during the last batch was also like market sizes were not big enough to be venture-backed. And the last reason is insufficient differentiation. So this means we're not convinced that the proposed solution is sufficiently different from existing solutions already in the market. And we weren't convinced that they were able to capture a significant share of the market. So these were just some of the top 3 rejection reasons that we saw. So the last thing that I'll talk about before we get into the pitch review is resources. We've got a ton of resources available to everyone to help you in your application if you have more questions. So we'll send these links in an email after the event, and we'll drop some of them here as well. I do recommend that you take a look at our FAQ. It is a huge time saver. Please do read it. We answer very common questions from founders like, how much do we invest? Do all founders need to be present at all our calls? Can I apply without a co-founder? We have a guide to answering all of our application questions as well, which tells you exactly what we're looking for. So 2 new guides that we have are our Getting into Iterative and What Happens at Iterative guides. Getting into Iterative is a lot about what I've covered here already today. So keep it handy when you're doing your application to make sure you're answering our questions specifically. We've also just launched a library of past applications for you to check out what other successful founders have submitted before in their applications. And this is honestly a game changer for founders because you can specifically see, not just read what we tell you, but also see how other founders have put in their applications. So what happens at Iterative covers more about the program, if you're curious about that, the value that we provide, and then the deal terms, benefits. And if you're curious about how we run our office hours, all of this is covered in the document itself. Okay, so now we're going to go into the pitch deck review, the part that you guys have all been waiting for. So before I hand over to Hsu Ken, just a heads up on all the startups receiving feedback. So we'll call all these startups in no particular order, but just know that you're in the queue. Hsu Ken will flash his slides and talk about it. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to go through everyone, so please do, we're really sorry about that, but please do manage your expectations. And founders, please ask any questions you have about the feedback directly in the chat, and we'll get to them after Hsu Ken presents his feedback. And with that, I'll stop sharing screen so Hsu Ken can take over.
All right. Hey guys. Okay, so what I'm going to do is Judy sent me these slide pitches early yesterday, so I took a look at them and then I took some notes on them, on kind of like things, kind of I won't kind of like say mistakes, but basically kind of like things that I guess things that we often kind of see people kind of like, I guess, get wrong on kind of like decks, or maybe, sorry, how do I kind of make this more kind of productive? I'm going to give people feedback on ways to kind of make their decks stronger, right? And so I'm going to point out ways that I think that people can do so that their decks can be kind of like stronger. These before I kind of go in there, I want to kind of make it clear to the people, making these decks is pretty hard, and fundraising is hard, and pitching is hard, and all of that kind of like stuff is hard. And so when I give kind of feedback, this hopefully it's in the spirit of kind of like these pitches can kind of improve. And so it's going to be kind of like negative by design, but hopefully it's kind of taken in the vein of kind of like, hey, these are things that people can do to improve. There is going to be common things that you'll see kind of through these as part of my feedback, which is stuff that we see as a common piece. And so as we go through this, I'll kind of like point these things out. I think if you guys have questions, Judy, I'm sure we put questions into the chat, and then maybe kind of Judy, you can just kind of monitor chat for me, and you can give me a shout if there's something we should kind of like answer. But otherwise, I'll kind of get started here. So I'll share my screen, Judy, and then I'll kind of just go through these.
Yeah, let's go
Okay,
through it.
cool. I've got them all open. All right. People can see my screen?
Yep.
Good? Judy, we're good? Okay, cool. All right. So this first company is Cyber Sentry. And again, I kind of just look at these in the morning and then I took some kind of notes as I was kind of like doing it. So maybe the first thing that is common that I've seen with kind of a lot of decks is they make a lot of declarative statements. And so this one is kind of a similar place where it says SMEs can't afford full-time DevOps or incident response teams. Okay, I guess, right? And I think the thing that you kind of always get curious about is like, okay, I guess that's true, right? That's probably true. Some people agree, disagree, but the more interesting thing is kind of like why this isn't the case, why this is not. Alert-only systems overwhelm teams by rarely solve root problems. Again, it's declarative. I guess I'll just take your word for it, right? And so I think there's like a bunch of this where people are kind of like making declarative statements, but they're not explaining kind of like why. It's not obvious kind of like why. And so I think these statements just end up being not as strong. And so I mean, to just make other examples of this, it's kind of like if I was like, people in Singapore want to like want to eat I don't know, Filipino food. It's like, I mean, that might be true, right? But it's kind of like I'm just asking you to take my word for it, right? As opposed to kind of being able to explain like why Filipino food is popular, why this is kind of happening, and that kind of stuff. So a lot of declarative statements and declarative statements just tend to be kind of like weaker. So there's that. Um, Other kind of statements here. Most solutions are too expensive, complex, or detection only. This is something that I think people talk a lot about when they're like talking about these. Again, what is too expensive? What is complex? What is detection? Like, I guess I know what detection only is, but even then, it's just like more declarative statements, right? And so I think it's the arguments are weaker with kind of like a lot of these kind of like statements. Um, and then again, the thing that we talk a lot to our companies about is this first slide is basically a problem slide, and if you don't set up the problem slide well, everything else kind of falls flat, right? So if you don't really kind of understand the problem, it really doesn't hit home for you. When you get to the solution slide, you're like, okay, I guess, right? And so this happens here kind of a little bit. So there's quite a lot of declarative statements, and then they get to the solution slide, and they're like, observer mode, learn system behavior baselines to detect anomalies precisely. And it's like, I mean, I could see how that can kind of be useful, right? But there's not the like setup yet of like, oh, this solves some really big problem, and then I'm like using it. And so this ends up being kind of like a feature list. And I think when people are thinking about solutions, they're not kind of thinking kind of feature list as much. They're if you set up the problem very well, then the solution kind of hits hard about like, okay, this is how you solve the problem, right? Um, and so I think there's a piece here that is this first kind of two sides are a little bit kind of like they don't hit as hard, and it's primarily because of the setting up of the problem. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple of these here. Snapshot and traction. It's always better if you have kind of like graphs and more numbers and all of that kind of stuff. If there's no numbers, I just don't count any of it as kind of like traction. So as people kind of know this. Okay, this is a competition slide. I saw this in a lot of decks. And by the way, there's nothing, sorry, there's nothing, none of the criticism that I have of this deck is abnormal. We see this all the time. They just happen to be first, so you're going to see this quite a lot. Competition slide. Everybody, a lot of people like to do this version of like, they don't do this, we do this. They don't do this, we do this. I hate those slides. I hate them. And the reason why I hate them is because no company wins because they do a bunch more features than other people. That's no company wins that way. A company wins because they figure out one thing that another person is neglecting and that is really important, and then they figure out that thing, or they go after some new market segment or something like that. It's to me ridiculous to basically make an argument that you do more things than like several billion-dollar publicly listed companies with 10,000 people. Like that can't be the truth, right? And so I always kind of like think about some of this kind of like stuff. And so I think whenever you're kind of quoting like we can do this and this giant $10 billion company can't do that, I'm always like, I think they can. And so you want to be able to make an differentiation. You want to be able to make an argument why they are overlooking something, or they are they are not targeting some segment of the market that which is overlooking, not targeting some segment of the market that kind of should be kind of like targeted for, right? And so, I mean, in this one, they're targeting SMEs. I don't think Darktrace or Sentinel-1 targets SMEs, and so I mean, it's simple as basically just like, look, they are very sophisticated, full-featured products, but SMEs only need a fraction of this, but they're forced to pay for the whole bunch. So literally, our differentiation is we spend more of our energy on the stuff that SMEs use. We spend none of our energy on any other stuff, and then we have lower costs as a result. Cool. Differentiation. Done. Right. Making the argument that like they don't have self-healing, they don't kind of do this stuff. It's like you're overselling basically. Okay. Roadmap part. I saw this in a couple of the slides too. Roadmap is always very interesting. Most of the time, people's roadmaps are not ambitious enough. I feel this way with this slide too. They're not ambitious enough. So to me, it is what Q2 2025 now, and in basically just under 3 quarters, they're going to have kind of 5+ clients. Too slow. Even in the best case scenario for our companies, I'd be like, I wish you had kind of like more. And so it is very difficult for a founder, I think, to get a sense of like how fast they should be going. And I think people are like afraid to kind of put numbers that are too high in case they can't hit them. And so I understand where this kind of like comes from. And by the way, when you do kind of roadmap and stuff, revenue is the thing people care about. And so to me, I'm kind of like, when are you going to make $100,000, 100,000 AR? When are you going to make a million AR, right? Um, and so I think if I'm doing these timeline things, you want to use kind of like your North Star metric for which in this case is probably kind of revenue, and then you want to kind of layer up in the revenue. And so I'm going to get to 1,000 MRR by doing these things. I want to get to 10,000 MRR by doing these things, 100,000 MRR by doing these things. I'm going to do that by this time. Um, you typically want to leave out stuff like polish UX and back it. Like nobody, investors don't care, right? And so that's too kind of like detailed for that. And so investors really care about, I'm going to get to this revenue milestone by this date, this revenue milestone by this date, and then here are the like two things I'm going to do to kind of get there. And so you want to think about roadmaps this way, and then you want to be a bit more aggressive. And so I like it when founders are more aggressive than they're not as aggressive. And there's this sweet spot where it's like you're kind of like being aggressive, kind of like enough. And so, by the way, if you're trying to figure out what that is, our standard for the batch is we want people to grow 5 to 7% every week. And so if you grow 5% every week for a year, you 12.6x. And if you grow 7% a week for a year, you 33x. That's roughly what we think kind of like early stage startups that are growing fast can kind of like do. So there's that. Okay, then there's the rest of this stuff. Okay, maybe the thing that I'll say kind of like overall about kind of this pitch that maybe is helpful to people is it's missing a secret. And Judy kind of started talking about this, but I felt this way about kind of most of the pitches, and we'll kind of go through it. A secret is something that is you believe that very few other people believe, and you happen to be right, or something that you know that very few people know, that very few people know. So it's one of those two things. And so the biggest kind of like startups tend to be manifestations of those secrets. If you believe the same, if you know what everybody else knows and you believe what everybody else believes, it's hard for me to buy that you're going to do something that's very different. I mean, almost by definition. I mean, you believe what everybody else believes and you know what everybody else knows. So I don't know. How are you going to kind of do something different? And so I think we look at this quite a lot, and I'm not sure what that is here. Right. So I'm not sure what the contrarian kind of thing is, and I'm not sure what this person kind of knows that other people kind of like don't know. And so I think we kind of like take it this way. All right, Judy, let me pause there. Anything in the chat you want me to hit? You want me to kind of go through some more of these? This one's a little bit longer
Uh,
because it's the first one.
yeah, nothing so far from Arsalan.
Okay.
Oh, wait, sorry, I just saw something. So he's asked, like, basically the roadmap should be also focused on the revenue as well, and if yes, how heavily it should be weighted.
I mean, that's the only thing that investors care about. What are you talking about? That's the only thing they care about. They don't care about features and all that stuff. Look, the roadmap that people care about is when are you going to hit different kind of okay, if you want to do a roadmap, you basically are like, when are you going to hit some kind of like common milestones, right? So if you're doing a SaaS business, it's like, okay, if you have zero revenue now, when are you going to get 1,000 in MR? When are you going to get 5,000 MR? When are you going to get 10,000 MR? And then in those milestones, you should be able to kind of talk about what are the things you're doing to unlock that milestone. So if you just say, I'm going to get 5,000 MR in the next 6 months, I'll be like, fantastic. What do you need to do in order to get there? And if they're like, I don't know, then I'm like, yeah, you're definitely not hitting that milestone, right? But the thing you want to do is, I'm going to get to 5,000K in MMR in 3 months by targeting. I'm going to do warm introductions with my friends, small SMEs that are this, and I'm going to target to them first. And I'm going to build around just this one feature. Okay, I'm going to get to 10,000K in MMR by doing a referral program around those people to kind of get to this next step. And so, what are the next three kind of milestones that kind of out in front of you in terms of revenue? And then what are you doing in order to get there? And by the way, if this is your deck for anybody that kind of goes my email, we're going to send it out to people. And so if you want kind of like specific kind of questions about kind of like things, email me and I can kind of give you the specific ones. We shouldn't get too bogged down and kind of just, answering kind of like startup specific kind of like stuff.
Shall we answer one more last question
Sure.
from Arsalan
Yeah,
before we
you
move
drive
on?
me. Yeah.
Okay, so about the differentiation in secret
Yeah.
sauce, is it something else apart from what you do differently from your competitors?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think look, the secret sauce is not just like what you do. It's like all startups are a thesis. They are a hypothesis about a space, right? And so it's more core than just like a feature, right? And so, for example, what was Airbnb's contrarian kind of take? Airbnb basically said there's a lot of people that want more unique experiences, and we can deliver those unique experiences by allowing people to rent out their homes. That was the hypothesis they had. Now, they looked ridiculous for the first 3 years because nobody wanted to do that, and all the investors laughed at them. And then it turns out that that hypothesis is true, and now they're worth kind of like a couple $1 billion, right? But that was a hypothesis that they had about a company. It's not like a feature, right? The company is literally built around that hypothesis. And so when you're thinking about your differentiation, if you're thinking about it at the feature level, which I think a lot of people do, I don't think if you think about it at the feature level, anybody can build a feature. It's really easy. Darktrace will build it, Sentinel won't will build it. It's really easy. The really good differentiation ones are in order for Darktrace to go in the direction I am, they're going to have to kind of go in a completely new direction. So for what if you are Marriott and you were trying to compete with Airbnb, you would have to figure out a whole new structure to kind of how to do this, right? And so Airbnb basically won because A, Marriott did not believe what Airbnb's hypothesis was, and for Airbnb and for Marriott to do it, they have to run a completely new business model. Marriott owns all the hotels and all of that kind of stuff and service staff and whatever, and Airbnb doesn't do any of that, right? And so the biggest differentiations are kind of more fundamental than kind of like even, I mean, what you do in terms of kind of like a feature. It's like core to kind of like your why your company exists almost.
Okay. There's no more questions from
Yeah.
Arsalan. Yeah, he says thanks a lot.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, cool. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Next one here. Bill. I got Bill AI. Billy AI. Okay. A couple of things with this one here. Let me open up my notes. Um, Similar kind of like thing here. So you guys, if you guys want to make these kind of really good, you want to really nail your problem statement and you really want to kind of get that to work. And so when I was kind of like going through this one, if you read the headlines always throw me off too. AI powered full stack last mile retail commerce platform. What the hell is that? It's a lot of buzzwords put in the same thing. AI powered buzzword, full stack buzzword, last mile buzzword, retail commerce buzzword platform. So it's hard to know what this is. And so when you guys are trying to work on these kind of like things, just explain what you do as simply as possible. There is no way, whoever the founder is here, that you would explain what your startup does to your mother as or father, AI powered full stack last mile retail commerce platform. Right. And so I have no idea what any of that. I don't know what this like means. And so I think a lot of times that kind of like throws it off for people. And so you want to pick something that is like easy to kind of like understand. So anyway, I think try to talk in kind of simple terms for everybody out there. You don't need to kind of make your business kind of making your business sound more complicated than it is doesn't make it kind of like more valuable. It kind of makes people kind of think that it's overly makes it hard to kind of understand. Okay. Again, a lot of declarative statements, limited access and data gaps, cost, FMCG, price, scalability and sales, data blindness, limited sales, retailers rarely buy without credit. I mean, that one actually makes a little bit more sense. But it's a lot of declarative stuff. And I'm kind of like, okay, I could see how these are kind of like problems, but how big of a problem is this? Is this like a big deal? Is this like a small deal? Like, I mean, there's FMCG brands that kind of work where they are. So I guess I'm kind of like, I could see how these could be a problem, but I'm not sure how big of a problem it is. How much of an impact is it? And so I'm just like not sure. Another way that you can tackle this, by the way, is you can talk about problems from a user experience kind of like standpoint. And so some of our companies will just talk about it from user experience standpoint. And so if like they'll just talk about it from like a, you know, I don't know, like imagine you're kind of like you own kind of like a mom and pop kind of like neighborhood store in, I think this is a Bangladesh company in Bangladesh. And you're trying to kind of restock it. You can only buy from this one person. You'd have no idea whether the price is good or not because there's no competitive pricing. Like you can kind of tell the story that's kind of around it that will kind of hit a little bit harder than I think kind of just like weak distribution, limited sales, like that kind of stuff. So I think you want to be a little bit more that and kind of tell a bit more of a story. And so for a lot of people, I think you can tell problems as kind of like story. Okay, so problem, I get it from a like intellectual level, but I don't kind of like emotionally kind of like get it. Okay, solution. Um, Full stack. It's funny because I feel like they ran out of space to say AI powered, and so they just put the full stack part and then threw embedded invoice financing at the end. And so again, for people that are trying to do this, people kind of notice these things, and so I'm like, wait, is it not AI powered then? Is it more about embedded invoice financing? Like, and by the way, embedded invoice financing also kind of like a buzzword. So there's this part, okay, fulfillment, digital orders, BNPL delivery, and Okay, full stack. I guess again, I feel like this would benefit from kind of just like having more of a kind of like user story around this. I'm like, okay, I think what they do is they are a distributor of goods. Honestly, I feel like that's what they are, right? So if you run one of these stores, you can buy from them. They will fulfill kind of the order. You will get kind of you can get tracking for it. You get invoice financing for it. That's what I think it is, which is a much kind of like more straightforward way to say it. Uh, how it works. Brand sales man user. Okay. This slide is, and I think for a lot of people, sometimes they make slides of this. It's quite confusing because there's arrows going in like two different directions and kind of different parts. And so people get confused. So everybody's going to read the top part, then they read dark storage, then they see sales there, but then there's brand sales going back towards it. And I think people can kind of get thrown off. And I saw this in a number of the slides here. The diagrams are a little bit too complicated. Investors are not that smart, including me, and they have even shorter attention span. And so if they don't kind of get it immediately, they just kind of like their brains turn off. And so you want to make it kind of like as straightforward as possible. And so I, and honestly, I feel like this business is like pretty straightforward. You're basically a distributor where you can buy products through an app, right? And now that I've said that, everybody gets what they do. So like, why don't we just say that? And so anyway, I think there's that. Um, okay, so then this is the part when I got really confused when I saw this digitized and readjust by replacing pen and paper methods. Because I thought I understood it, but then all of a sudden there's like a bookkeeping element, and then there's Billy GPT, and then there's a sales suite, and I'm like, wait, what? And so I think I was going through here, and I was like, what is this? I was like, okay, they're basically a products distributor, and I'm like, okay, products distributor with embedded financing, okay, that makes sense. Okay, I'm just gonna ignore all of this, and I'm like, products distributor, and then I get to this part, I'm like, so not a products distributor, and so now I'm kind of confused. I'm like, okay, now they do bookkeeping, and they have this GPT thing. Why do they need this GPT? So whenever I kind of look and see companies that kind of do all of these things, I think that the company is kind of unfocused is my reaction to a lot of this because they're doing a bunch of stuff, right? And I'm kind of like, well, if one of these things was working really well, then they would just focus on these things, but they're kind of trying a bunch of different stuff. And I can, as a founder from before, I can imagine them trying to sell this and they're like, okay, so we do this and then we do this and then we do this and we do this. And it's hard for customers to kind of understand. So to me, I'm like, they just do so much stuff. I'm like, there's not a clear kind of like, okay, this is kind of like what the company does. And then I think I struggle to kind of really understand kind of like where the focus kind of like is. And I think the takeaway is it doesn't feel kind of like very focused. So yeah, I mean, if you need three slides if you need a solution slide, how it works, and a product slide, I think there's like too much to kind of like try to explain. You should be able to explain what you do in one slide. Solution slide, that's it. You should be able to do it. And if you can't do it, then you should have larger conversations. Okay, market size. I don't pay attention to any of these, but I know some other people do, and primarily because when I was a founder, I can also make up numbers, and so I literally don't bother looking at any of these. Um, yeah, business model, kind of like same. Okay, then I got here, um, and then it kind of made more sense. Sorry, made a little bit more kind of sense to me. So the traction here is a little bit weak. And the thing that I think about then is if I'm thinking back to them doing a bunch of stuff, I'm like, okay, so they're doing a lot of stuff and they're not really growing. And then my read is they're trying a bunch of stuff because they're trying to grow by doing more stuff. Again, I have no idea if that's what they're actually doing, but that's what I'm thinking in my head, which is typically not the strategy you want when you are trying to grow. You don't actually want to do more stuff. And so that's kind of what I was thinking here. For everybody who has traction that it's like this, and maybe your traction is not as stellar as you were like kind of hoping for, you need to make an argument for why the next 3 to 6 months is going to be different than the previous kind of 3 to 6 months. So that's the thing you guys want to be able to do. If you're showing traction that is a little bit kind of like maybe not super strong, which is totally fine. All startup likes have kind of like weak traction at some point. You want to be able to make the case of kind of like what have you learned recently that you are incorporating so that the next 3 to 6 months is going to be more growth. So if I was investing in this company, I would be like, I don't actually care that their growth is kind of like not that strong. My thing is like, is the next 6 months going to be any different? And what have they learned in the last kind of like time so that they can imply that, right? So learnings is something that kind of matters quite a lot. And so This I'm kind of just like, okay, it's maybe kind of like it feels like they're searching by building more stuff, but traction is a little bit kind of like weaker. Um, all right. Yeah, I also I also kind of don't I know I talked about roadmaps. I don't put any stock in kind of like roadmap forecasts that are kind of like years out because again, it's just like tough to kind of like do. So I think my biggest thing here is I think maybe I'll kind of maybe this is good for us to do. Maybe I'll summarize kind of like feedback for people after I kind of go through it. I would try to simplify what it is that you're actually what the company actually does. Less is almost always more when pitching investors about this. If you are doing a lot of stuff, I would primarily try to kind of pitch the thing that you think going forward. The thing you want to remember about investors is they are investing in your future, not your past. And so I don't care what you started out building. The only thing I care about is what are you building now and what are you focused on doing now, right? And so if that helps people kind of simplify. But I think my primary take here is um, uh, try to simplify kind of like how you talk about kind of what you're doing, and then try to put some sort of learnings. And again, there's not a contrarian take or kind of like a thing that kind of like most people don't know here, right? And often the best things about kind of the things that people don't know is something you learned along the way. And so it's just kind of missing that. And that's the stuff that really kind of like stands out when people are kind of like doing it. And so I can kind of like if there is some secret thing that people that they know or contrarian believe, I can kind of like breeze through the rest of it. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. That's interesting. Like we should talk more about that. So yeah, but my two takes are I think simplify kind of the parts at the beginning about what you do, and then try to kind of weave in some sort of secrets or kind of learnings about your space. Like why haven't people done this before? Is there some unlock? Is there I don't know, whatever. Any questions, Judy?
Arono, do you have any questions
We could also
for
take
Hsu
questions
Ken?
from other people too, right? I mean, some of these concepts are like kind of like they'll apply to everybody. So I don't know if there's something I said and people have a question about, I can also explain it more.
Yeah, there's some questions, mostly around the validation stage. So how much proof or user interest is needed to justify this idea?
I mean, Judy, I feel like you can give me the answer for this at this point. There's no number, guys. There's no magic number, and the reason why I joke with this is because this is a question that gets asked often. I sometimes now joke that I'm like, I don't know if like Asian schools are so kind of like test based and kind of like there's some grade that you have to kind of get, and so everybody thinks that like, okay, if you get this much score, you immediately get to pass go. But there isn't a number, guys. I've invested in companies with no traction, and I've turned down companies with millions of traction, millions of dollars of traction. I'm trying to think about the future, and there are some companies where I'm just like, look, they make $2 million in revenue, but I think they're not going to grow beyond $3 million, and so I'm not interested in investing. And there's some companies which I think are going to kind of grow very quickly and kind of be very big, and so I invested in those companies. And so it's very contextual and kind of very kind of like nuanced. So there's no number.
Got it. Josh has another question. He's wondering if you can expand when you said it's not about doing more stuff when you
Oh,
grow.
yeah. Okay, so this is similar to the whole kind of competitive advantage thing where people are like more feature, like just tables, and I do more features. So, in my experience, kind of like working on startups and kind of doing stuff, it always ended up being the companies that do the most stuff are not the ones that win. The companies that win are the ones that have some really valuable secret, and that valuable secret is it's like I mean, again, it's like Airbnb. Did Airbnb have the most features? No. The entire thing was just built off of this like very kooky idea, right? And that was it. And so it wasn't that they did, I mean, Airbnb didn't win because they had more features than Marriott. They had less, right? Same with kind of like Uber and all of this kind of like stuff. It's not that they did more. They just had a fundamentally different view on how the world should work. And they knew something that other people didn't know, or they believed something they didn't know, and then they kind of built around that. And so I'm not looking for investors. We're not looking for kind of companies that do a lot of stuff. We're looking for companies that are built around some really interesting kind of like thesis. And the thesis is the differentiation, not the like features and not kind of like doing more. And actually, it's almost kind of worse because when early stage startups do a lot of things and they do a bunch of different features, it almost is always that it's because they don't have a real thesis or hypothesis on kind of their space. And so they're just building lots of stuff, right? And so, sorry, maybe I'll kind of say this a different way. One of the things I experienced when I was a first time founder and when I talked to a lot of first time founders is they when they tell you about what their startup does, it's always a like 10-minute vomit session. And they just tell you 100 things that their product does. And you almost have to like stop them because they just, okay, we do this and we do this, and then this person said this and we do this, and they're just like super excited and they vomit a bunch. If you talk to somebody who has kind of like done this for a while, they tell you their startup in like 2 sentences. They're like, my startup allows people to rent out their homes to tourists. That's it. That's it. That's all we do. And honestly, it's really kind of interesting because they'll kind of say that and they're like, if you think that's a bad idea, then you think my startup is dumb. But that's it. We don't do any more than that. Right. And so they almost have this kind of confidence where it's like, I do this very kind of, I have this very simple hypothesis. That's what my entire company is built on. I'm not going to add on more so that you think it's more or anything like that. If you disagree with that, like a fundamental kind of premise, you disagree. Totally understand. Right. But that's what it is. And so they almost kind of say the like thing and then they just like stand on it. As opposed to the person's like, okay, sorry. Maybe another way to explain this is think if you go to a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant that says they do Chinese food, Indian food, Mexican food, Western food, and Italian food, how good is that restaurant? That restaurant is shit. I don't need to eat the food, right? You go to a restaurant and you go and they're like, we do one thing. That's it. There's no menu. Do you want the thing? That restaurant is going to be fucking good, right? And so it's a similar thing with kind of like a startup where it's just like if you are doing a lot, if you're a restaurant that serves a lot of food, it's because all of your food is shit. And so you're basically trying to win by saying, I will do anything and it'll all be shit. And if you're doing a restaurant that does one thing, they're basically saying, I do one thing because my shit is so good. You don't need to bother with the rest. Like my favorite Japanese curry restaurant is in Kyoto. And the only thing you walk in is, do you want cheese with your curry or not? That's it. There's no other rules. That's it. You sit down and you're like, cheese, please. That's it. That's the only order. And it's amazing. So your startup should kind of be the same.
Wow, ended on a very hungry note there.
Yeah, I know.
Uh,
Great.
it's 6:53.
Yeah,
Shall we do one more company slide and then we can move to Slido?
sure. All right. Can people see?
Yeah, it's Hellstrom.
And by the way, for all the other companies, I did some notes on all the other companies. Judy, I'll send you all my notes and then you can just send them to the companies. And
Will
then
do.
I did them anyway. Okay, this one. AI lifestyle centric prop tech platform. Same kind of thing. Not sure what lifestyle kind of centric means. I think if people are kind of like looking at this, they're just not sure what it's like the word cloud. I'm just not sure what it kind of like does. So that was like my initial kind of thing. I know what individually some of the words mean, except for lifestyle centric. But I don't know what the whole thing means. Um, okay. Then they go into kind of opportunity. Southeast Asia region demand is kind of growing. Sure, sure, sure. Okay. They get to the problems part. Um, again, it's like kind of declarative. Rental lifestyles and new behaviors are being neglected by the traditional marketplace model. It's declarative, but it's also kind of vague. Like, how? Why? What does that mean? Like, how are they neglected? Like, it's not kind of specific enough, right? And so I don't know if sometimes you want to pick a problem that is kind of like more concrete to help get investors kind of like an understanding of it. And so one of the things we tell our companies is like, I think sometimes people try to make problem statements that are like so grand and so kind of like can fit everything that it kind of doesn't mean very much as opposed to just like simple problems. Um, and so it's simple problems that you can then expand kind of like on as you kind of work on it. And so um, I would I would suggest people kind of like be more specific about these. I feel like this person is also kind of using lifestyle kind of factors a lot in a bunch of places. And it's again, I don't know what lifestyle factors is. So conventional markets fail to capture subjective lifestyle factors. Okay, what are we talking about here? Right? Like, is it like, I mean, diet is lifestyle. It's like exercise is lifestyle. Like what you do on weekends is lifestyle. Like I just don't kind of understand kind of what it is. User behavior shifts from browsing ads to asking AI. Okay, that's not a lifestyle thing. That's a new behavior kind of like thing. Um, but this was all about lifestyle. And so again, there's like dissonance where it's like you're framing the company all as kind of about lifestyle, but then this is not really kind of a lifestyle thing. It's like a behavior thing. So anyway. So again, I'm not sure kind of like what the problem is yet. Um, okay. Again, it's like renters' personal style and living aspirations. Still not sure what that means. And so I think it's a bit vague. It keeps talking about lifestyles. It says words like lifestyles and personal style and living aspirations, but it's not concrete what that is. If I was going to kind of work on this, I would actually pull out like one specific case of a certain lifestyle that impacts how somebody chooses like where to live, and then I would kind of like show a example of kind of like here's what you get when you kind of like use a kind of traditional marketplace kind of model, and here's what you would get on mine, and it should be like a better fit of kind of like what that is. Um, but in this case, it's kind of just like hard to know like what are the specific kind of like what is the lifestyle thing that kind of like matters here kind of like so much that this person's kind of building around. And so they're putting a lot of stress on this like lifestyle word, and they haven't really talked about what the lifestyle is or kind of like explained it or kind of that kind of stuff. So okay, move forward. This is kind of how it works. Basically, it looks like they're taking a picture and then they help you come up with a description of it. And then they'll help you kind of like put an ad. And then on the flip side, okay. And then I guess on the flip side, then you can kind of just like type in what you're looking for, and then they will kind of like take that into put that into the contextual stuff. And then it's like Tinder. I mean, I guess that's the thing that I'm like kind of surprised when I was thinking about lifestyle kind of like choices. I was like, oh, is this gonna help people like find roommates or kind of find this kind of stuff? But this kind of seems like, okay, you can take a picture and then use basically ChatGPT to kind of like generate a description. And so it's like a better listing, which is not really a lifestyle thing. And then there's kind of like a piece here that is like, okay, then you can kind of type these things and get it in. So again, I think part of me is like, this doesn't feel like a lifestyle thing. This is more of a like use AI to help generate better performing listings and then use AI to like curate listings. But I'm not sure how that kind of ties to the like lifestyle stuff. And so I think there's just cognitive dissonance here for me on kind of like what it is. By the way, I see tons of pitches like this. So this is again not unique. I think sometimes like there's a lot of dissonance around kind of like what people kind of are saying kind of the problem is, what they actually kind of do. And so there's kind of like a lot of these kind of like different pieces here. Same, my friend, the competitor analysis slide of kind of like, hey, my very small startup does more things than Airbnb that is worth like $40 billion. And it's like, there's no way. Right. And so again, this isn't kind of like that. I think a more clear kind of differentiation could have been something around like, I'm going to reinvent this kind of company a little bit. But if they were making an argument that like, um, hey, finding an apartment, sorry, finding an apartment with roommates is very difficult, and it's difficult because you want to find roommates that have similar lifestyles as you. If somebody wants to stay home at the time and I kind of like go out all the time, we're going to kind of hate each other, and that's bad. So we want to find roommates that are similar to that. We have a platform that does kind of questionnaires, and then we match you with people that have kind of similar lifestyle choices as you. I'm making this up. Lifestyle choices as you, and then we help you kind of find kind of districts where there are more people that are kind of fit like you. Okay, that that is a more clear kind of like competitor analysis than Airbnb. Airbnb doesn't do any matching. It doesn't care about kind of roommates or anything like that. And so different from that. Property Guru, same. Property Guru just does the listings, doesn't do anything with roommates. And so basically our key differentiation is we take into account this like roommate thing. Again, that's like a more clear differentiation than just like features, right? And so can Airbnb do roommate stuff? I guess, but that's like a whole new thing for them, right? Can they do Property Guru? Can Property Guru do it? I guess, but that's like a very kind of like different thing for them, right? As a like for example, can Property Guru do direct messaging? They can build that in like 2 weeks. It's not that big of a deal, right? And so again, the real differentiation stuff is like stuff that is like they have to like think about a new customer. They have to kind of think about some new kind of like thing. So again, I just don't think about these competitive sites that much. Um, People out there, you should try to use your competition slide to hammer home what you're like, what is different about your thesis or what your secret is, much more than it is feature. So the good competitor slide is kind of just like, I mean, the way that we always kind of frame it for people is like your competition slide is everybody thinks X, they're wrong. It actually should be Y. Here's the reasons why it should be Y and why everybody else is wrong. We're doing Y. Right? That is like a much stronger kind of like thing around kind of like, okay, cool. That's where your differentiation. Now, You and I then can have a debate on whether Y is correct or not, why we think Y is correct, but at least I know what I'm betting on. I basically, if I invest in the company, I'm betting on the fact that Y is everybody is doing X, but they actually should be doing Y, and I'm betting on this company that's doing Y. That's my bet. Like literally formulates my entire investment for me, right? And so you want to kind of like use competition sites for that if you can, which basically ask you to ask very kind of like very like deep questions about your startup. All right.
All right. We've got a question here
Yeah.
from Shushma. What's the alternative to a declarative way of framing the problem?
Tell a story. Tell a story or explain kind of like why that's the case, right? So I think the problem is the thing that a lot of people do is they make a lot of declarative statements. So they make like five declarative statements. The better way to do this is make one declarative statement that is again the boiled down thing of like what your startup is at the heart of what you're doing, and then explain why that's really important, right? And so I think people often spend too much time with too many declarative statements and no explanation of why. And what they should be doing is they pick the one declarative statement, which is their hypothesis for why they should exist, and then they make an argument for why that's the case and explain why, right? And so that's the better way to kind of do this. Again, less is more in kind of these cases. Oftentimes, when I see a lot of declarative statements, the thing I think about is they were trying to put this together and they couldn't figure out which one. If I force them to choose one statement, they can't tell me what one statement it is, which means that I don't think they have like a very good grasp on what their company's about.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Can
Ted,
you get a more example on this? I mean, a real example. Can you give us, like what the competition slide should be? For example, if we uh, uh, consider in Grab, so how the competition slide should be for the Grab?
Wait, sorry, I don't understand. You're asking for an example of a competition slide, but then you said something else.
Exactly. Exactly. Like from a real startup scenario, you can take, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I gave one of Airbnb. Airbnb is like the entire hotel industry is premised around the idea that people want to stay in hotels, which they own and whatever. We believe that people want to stay in more unique experiences that exist within people's homes. And there's an open supply of like basically empty rooms that exist that people are willing to rent out. That's completely different from a hotel.
Okay, thank you. I get
Yeah.
it.
okay. Ted, if you've got any questions, maybe you can ask them in Slido. I think we should move on to Slido now, Hsu
Okay.
Ken.
I will unshare. Then you're going to share?
Yeah, I'll put up the
Oh, it's so
Slido
dark. Wow.
screen.
Place is so dark.
There we go. Here. Okay, so if everyone can see my screen, we'll jump into this. If the applicant is a first-time founder, how do you judge the founder's executional capability or determine if he does what he says?
Oh, very straightforward. What is your goal over the next 3 months? If they don't have a goal for the next 3 months, they probably aren't going to be. I've never met anybody that can execute well and has no goals because you need a goal to kind of like execute well. And then if they have a goal, I say, what is your plan to kind of make that goal? And if they have no plan, I also think that they don't execute well because if you don't have a plan, then it doesn't really work. And then if they have a plan, then I said, why'd you choose this plan and not another plan or choose a different strategy? And if they didn't evaluate other options, then they're also probably kind of not very good. And so I just run through this list. I will ask you what your goal is over the next 3 months or month or whatever it is. And then whatever you tell me, I will say, what is your strategy to get there? And if you can't tell me, and then if you tell me that, I will tell you what other strategies did you kind of like think about. And then I just kind of work from there. And so it's not, I mean, nothing is kind of foolproof, but it's very much kind of like if nobody executes well without kind of being able to kind of like have a goal, have a strategy, have a plan for how to do it, and all of that kind of stuff, right? So,
Cool. Our next question. Can you develop more about being contrarian and the secret? I'm not sure I understand it fully.
yeah. Again, it's just two things. One is, what do you know that very few other people know? The second thing is, what do you believe that very few other people believe? So, I don't know. if there's like if there are 10 people that have been to the moon, those 10 people know something that very few other people kind of know. They probably know something about kind of like spaceflight or whatever. Or let's say, I don't know, you have worked in three Michelin star kitchens. You probably know things that other people don't know because very few people have worked in three Michelin star kitchens, right? And so, what are things that you know that other people don't really know? And typically, this is industry insight, right? And so, if you've worked at an industry that not a lot of people have worked in, or you've worked at an industry that not a lot of tech people have worked in, then you'll know something. A contrarian view is something you believe that very few people other believe. So, for example, I shocked somebody at a wedding this weekend because they were telling me how much of a rat race it was to live in Singapore, and I told them that I actually find it completely the opposite. I think Singapore is too chill, and they like lost their mind. Right? That's a contrarian view I have. Now, right or wrong, it doesn't really matter, right? I could be completely wrong about that, right? But that's a contrarian view. Most people in Singapore think Singapore is like very competitive and kind of like fast paced, and I think it's very slow, right? So that's a contrarian view. Again, the trick is, are you right or not, right? So if you start a startup and you have a contrarian view and you are wrong, then you're not going to kind of get very far, right? So my contrarian view about Singapore, if I'm wrong about it and I live my life if I live my life that way and I'm wrong, then it's not going to go that well for me. But if I'm right and everybody else is wrong, then I'm going to kind of like do well. So it's just an example of a contrarian view. Singaporeans don't hate me.
So if someone said like Transformers changed cinema, is that a contrarian view?
No, it's just a horrible take on movies. By the way, that's June. June this weekend basically told me that Transformers transformed cinema. Sorry, I guess that's a contrarian view, but
I
she's
would
just so
say.
wrong. But yes, it is a contrarian view. Yes, you're right, Judy. It's a horrible one, but yes, contrarian.
Okay, next question. We're gonna try and get to as many of these
Yeah,
as we can because it's
yeah,
7:10.
yep.
Is it better to find a co-founder first, as I'm not technical and will be more on the business side?
Gosh, I have no idea. Better in what sense? I mean, better to apply to iterative, better for your startup. I'm not really sure. But the thing I will kind of say is the better that matters most is you should do what you think is kind of in the best interest of your startup. Don't worry about iterative. Like iterative is a secondary kind of like thing, right? You should think about kind of like startups first. So, should you find a founder first? I mean, before what, I guess. And so there's not enough context to answer this kind of properly. I would spend, if you have an idea, I would spend time trying to validate your idea. June can drop links on how to kind of validate the idea and work on the idea. You can sell stuff before you ever need to build it. And so I don't think finding a technical co-founder is probably the first or the second step here. And so I think there's kind of like that piece. So yeah, but if you're talking from an iterative standpoint, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. We invest in kind of single founders too.
Are different startup verticals split between specialization between you and Brian?
No, we debated doing this, but it's actually completely random. So no, there's no split. There's like if you're doing property, Brian definitely knows a lot more about property than I do, but you may just end up with me anyway, so we split.
Okay. Is pain proportional to revenue or customer?
I mean, on some level, right? I mean, people are going to pay more money for larger pains, right? And so if something is like a minor annoyance, you're probably not going to pay that much to solve it. And if it's a very big pain, then you probably will. So yeah. It doesn't say anything about how many people have the problem, though.
Appreciating that the lack of validation is the highest reason for rejection. Are there exceptions to the norm and why?
There's some exceptions. If I believe so much in the thesis of what they are doing, or the thesis is just kind of like so interesting, then maybe. Or if the founders are just like so good that I feel like I would invest in them kind of like anyway, and they'll figure this out. Yeah, so it's possible. There's exceptions.
How should I back my secrets if it's belief-based?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Um, how should I back my secrets if it's belief based? I mean, you should have an, I mean, it is belief based, but you should have an argument for your belief. Right? Think about kind of like, okay, I studied science in school. So think about how scientists kind of do go about the world, right? They have a thing that they believe that this is how the world works. They have rationale for why they kind of believe that thing. And then they go and collect evidence that that is how the world works. So the best case scenario is you have all of those things. So you have a secret that you believe in. You have an explanation for why you believe it, a logical argument for why this is the case, and then you went and gathered evidence to back it up, right? Which again is basically what scientists do. So I'm just asking people to kind of do the same thing. So you should be doing all of those things. That's why validation is so important. That's why we have so many validation events, is because you can actually go and collect information about this and kind of data on it. And so, yeah. And honestly, validation, I feel like is so straight. It's like, it's not straightforward, but it's like, it's so accessible these days that anybody can really do it. And so I always think, I'm like, why haven't, if somebody applies the iterative and they don't have any traction, I'm like, why haven't you just done this yet? Just do it. Yeah.
Hmm. How many minutes do you spend reviewing each application? Do we use AI?
I have no idea how much time kind of overall kind of applications, and it depends on what stage, but every application is looked at by somebody. No company gets rejected without it being seen by somebody.
Is there anything that will make you immediately say yes or no?
I mean, if you tell me that Transformers 1 changed cinema, then I probably say no to your startup immediately. No, not really. I mean, look, my job is, unfortunately, the outcome of my job is I say no most of the time. But I think the thing that I have to work a lot, very hard, is I need to be open-minded. And so there's nothing that will kind of like immediately kind of like say no to, because I'm like trying to kind of understand, if a founder has quit their job to work on something, they kind of believe it enough to kind of take this risk. And so even if I don't think it's kind of promising initially or in that moment, I'm trying to kind of think in my head, I'm like, this is a smart, rational person who is taking a big risk to work on this thing. What are they seeing that I don't see? And so I'm trying to kind of be open-minded of it. Now, oftentimes, unfortunately, I don't kind of like see it, but there's nothing that kind of makes me immediately kind of like say yes or no either way, right? Yeah, even the yes side, there's nothing that kind of like goes. But I typically know, honestly, within the first 10 minutes of a call.
We have 8 more questions, and it's already going to be 7:15. So I think maybe we'll take just maybe 1 or 2 more.
I can try to power through. You want me to like rapid fire these?
Yeah, we can rapid
Okay.
fire. We've got 8. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see if I can I'll get these 5.
How much process, product, tech detail do you need to see at the application stage to feel that there's some
None.
secret sauce?
None. I only care about the problem and what is your kind of like solution for doing it, and then I evaluate whether I think you can do it or not. That's it. So no, nothing.
Okay. How do you decide how much to fund?
Oh, this is kind of dependent on kind of the stage of the company. And so if you want 500K, you probably have some kind of like revenue already, or there's existing investors who are kind of getting you at this. And so it's a little bit of an art. There's definitely not a science to this, but I think we do some evaluation of kind of like what stage is your company at, revenue, other investors involved. And so but it's that.
Condition to apply as one of the founders must be in Southeast Asia or most of the customers, but how does this work for no revenue, no customer MVP startup?
You need to be in Southeast Asia.
Oh.
Yeah, that's it.
How am I able to easily validate a secret? And surely one can validate a secret is no longer a secret.
No, not true. Right? You can validate a secret, and then just because you validate it doesn't mean it's not a secret anymore. People may not believe what you did that validate. And so validating is kind of like still somewhat subjective, even if you have evidence for it. You could have evidence that makes you think that you validated it and that it's true. And I could look at it and be like, it's not true. By the way, science works the same way. And so, no, there's definitely, it can be a secret. Just you are the only one that knows the truth and you have data to back it up. Other people don't have the data and other people don't have that, or they may just disagree with you. So, no.
Cool. Some ideas don't solve problems, like an app to capture images of supercars, but say an idea is in idea stage, how do you evaluate?
I mean, even in that, I mean, the problem that they're solving is boredom, right? And so people want to be entertained. And so I think even that one is just like entertainment, right? People are bored. They want to be able to do this. But if you want to go even further, you can, right? I mean, you can make the argument that is like, people want to be able to share pictures of supercars with their friends, and so you make an app to do that. So you can reframe this, and we can get kind of like we can do that. But say an idea not a pain solving is an idea. How do you not a pain solving isn't in idea stage? I mean, go find out if people want it or not, right? So how do you find out if people want Instagram? Well, go find out if like people are willing to sign up for a thing that it looks like Instagram. And so growth is all validation. Is basically just can you get people to kind of like give you money, sign up for this thing? So yeah, just do that. Even like the images of supercars, they just got a ton of people.
What in the first 10 minutes of the call do you assess that leads you to know if it's a yes or no?
Just how thoughtful they are. Have they've thought about kind of the thing? And so a lot of times it's just like I always start just by asking them questions, basic questions of what they do, and I think people who have kind of thought more deeply about it can kind of like go into kind of specificity and detail, and then they're kind of like excited to kind of share some kind of like secret or thing that they don't know. So, I don't know anything about most industries, and so in the first 10 minutes, if you really kind of understand that industry well, you probably are going to tell me something that I don't know. So.
At the validation stage, how much proof or user interest is needed to justify this idea?
No idea. That's totally up to you, right? Some people they don't need very much to work on it. Some people need a lot, and so it's totally dependent up to you. But that's what validation basically is about. So I don't know. I have no idea.
For initial stage startups 2 weeks old, but have a great working MVP with good traction, do we need to have monetization plans?
No, it's not a hard rule, but I think there's part of me that is like, I'm guessing this is, well, if it's consumer, then no. B2B, I'd be like, why don't you just charge people? But no, not necessarily.
Can you share the best validation method?
June, drop some Startup Academy links. We have a whole course on it, guys. We made like a ton of videos, and so it's just better than me. Rapid fire.
Where should I put secret statement in the slide?
Depends what the secret is. If the secret is you think there's a problem that other people don't think is a problem, then in the problem slide. If you have a novel way for solving a problem, then it's in the solution slide. If you have a novel thing about, I don't know, whatever. So it just depends. Depends on what the secret is. Do you like my rapid fire, Judy?
Yeah, you're going at it really fast. And we're done. So thank you so much for that. So again, thanks for everyone for joining us for this session. I hope you found this interesting and useful. And to everyone who got your pitch decks feedback on, if there's any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me. I will make sure like Hsu Ken gets to them. And for those that we weren't able to get to, Hsu Ken will share that feedback with me, and I'll share it with you guys as well.
And let me give a shout out to Lian, who's one of our founders that has been in the chat just answering questions and stuff. Lian was one of those founders. I met, it was like first 10 minutes, I like wrote down my notebook. I'm like, invest in Lian. And so Lian is awesome. I haven't read any of her responses, but like I will co-sign all of her responses, I'm sure. And so she's awesome. She's taking time out to kind of answer questions for you guys. So Lian, thank you for doing that. Take her answers kind of like seriously and kind of like legitimately and that kind of stuff. And so she was one of those where it was like, I would basically blind invest in Leanne's companies now. Like if she starts some new company, I'd be like, "Hi, Leanne, where do I send the money?" And so I think she's answering kind of like a lot of questions and stuff. Leanne, thanks for kind of like doing that. But her answers are great, so take a look at those guys.
Oh yeah, she's definitely
Hello.
helped answer a lot on the Slido, so that's really, really great. Thanks so
Yeah.
much, Leanne. And thanks everyone for joining.
Hello.
Look
Am
out for
I
our
audible?
email.
Hello.
Sorry, we're not going to take any more questions at the moment. We're just going to let everyone go, but don't worry, we have a recording of this coming up. And if you have more questions, please follow us on LinkedIn and sign up for our newsletter. We'll have more sessions of this for everyone. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thank you. Good night.